When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor. My back was pressed against cold metal, and white emergency lights flickered on and off above. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt as if the outside world had ceased to exist. My head cleared faster than I expected. I meant it wasn't a chemical that had knocked me unconscious. I had simply collapsed from the impact of whatever had happened upstairs. I sat up and took in the entire scene. 50 girls were trapped in a metallic hallway. Amber lights blinked on the walls of the 30-meter-long corridor, and heavy doors were locked on both sides. Some were still lying down, but the others were moving in a cool, calculated manner. The fastest girl was tall, with dark hair that looked like she was born for this nightmare. She reached the door and punched the panel hard, but nothing happened. He turned around and scanned the room, deciding who was useful and who was dead weight. His gaze lingered on me for half a second, and then he completely ignored me. I didn't mind, because I was used to being invisible. The next 10 minutes weren't just chaos, they were much worse. It was a kind of organized panic. The tall girl, whom everyone called agents, started issuing orders without anyone's consent. 2 other girls sat in a corner, whispering and forming alliances before they were even confirmed alive. A short-haired girl sat in the middle of the floor, laughing for no reason. Then I saw the first real problem sign near the technical panel. A small girl stood absolutely still, staring at the wires as if she had already figured everything out. I stood against the wall and watched as the emergency system activated at the 11-minute mark. There was no sound, but instead, a text message flickered on the panels on either side of the hull. White text on a black background, clinical and cold, stated that the primary power and medical modules were locked. The hydroponic units were not working, and the reserve storage was empty. The ration and distribution mode was conditional, with an unlocked condition. The minimum group family efficiency should be 40%. Family coefficient. Someone quietly asked what this meant. No one answered, because no one knew. Agent stared at the panel for 3 seconds, and then announced that it meant he wanted to make us submissive. He spoke with such confidence, as if to convince me that he had all the answers. The laughing girl, eerie, suddenly fell silent. Then, the interface appeared before me, not on the wall, but directly in front of my vision. A transparent overlay was responding to my focus, floating between me and the entire room. Shelter Family Link System Activated Coordinator Assigned Group Status. Dispersed Crowd Family Coefficient 7% Trust was critically low and stability was unstable. Participation was 12%, rationing mode was at starvation minimum. I hadn't even finished reading when data cards started loading for each girl. Name Potential Sector Loyalty Index, Trust Level, Fear Parameters, Hidden Factors and Growth Triggers were all visible. This was data I had no right to see, nor could I explain. Young Jin Medical Sector Potential Group Loyalty 64. Trust and Coordinator 23. Fear of rejection, high hidden factor. Self-sacrifice, tendency and avoidance of taking responsibility. Growth trigger first, successful intervention in a critical situation. Age and potential security coordination, power drive. High conflict index, high risk of betrayal for control. 51% emotional trigger being counted among the weak. I understood every detail, thoroughly hidden factor behind her rigidity lurked a deep fear of losing control of her life. Gold technical sector, potential social engagement, low conflict avoidance, high hidden factor. Given the right conditions, she could become the most reliable person in any crisis. I stood against the wall and read the cards while everyone else debated the family coefficient. They were debating whether the system would really starve 50 people, and whether Arjun had the authority to lead. She had no authority, but no one stopped her. System Notification Coordinator identified. Role assignment recommended in the next 6 hours. Current group trajectory fragmentation, and in 24 hours, the CO efficiency will drop to 4%. 4% means it will drop below 7%. I scanned the entire room. Arjun was drawing a circle in the corner. Those who were physically fit and had woken up first. Yuri was already there, meaning she had done the calculations quickly. Sona, the quiet girl near the panel, didn't move. I simply watched, invisible, quietly. Arjun was kneeling next to someone who had a head injury. She checked the wound with steady hands, without being told. She didn't realize she was doing exactly what her card had predicted. 3 hours later, the first ration distribution took place. The emergency minimum system released rations, barely enough for one small meal per person. There was no ceremony, no explanation. A hatch in the wall opened, and exactly 50 sealed portions appeared. I stayed behind and watched how people were taking it. Most people took their portions and retreated. Then there was Ming Hui, whose card immediately flagged her. Resource anxiety was high, and impulse control was low. She stole a second portion, just like the first. The system locked it before the hatch closed. Resource theft. Family coefficient dropped to 3% and trust index to 5%. The next distribution was reduced by 15%. The reduction was updated in real time on the panel. 3 girls standing near the wall saw their numbers drop and looked at each other in distress. They didn't know why. They just felt something was wrong. But I knew exactly why. The question was whether I should speak up or not. The system message came up saying coordinator intervention was recommended. Transparency of coefficient mechanics would have a high impact, but the risk of directly challenging dominant personalities was too great. There were only 6 hours left to assign roles before the fragmentation became irreversible. I glanced at Easy in the corner. She was speaking softly to her inner circle. Her eyes were scanning the room like a commander observing a battlefield. I moved away from the wall and walked to the center of the room. I said that the coefficiency had dropped because someone had taken 2 portions, and our next meal had been reduced by 15% because of this. This is how the system works. Whatever we do will affect us all. The entire room looked first at me and then at Ming Hu, who had his eyes fixed on the floor. Family coefficiency had increased by 2%. Event voluntary transparency had increased coordinator trust by 8%. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But this group had produced honest numbers for the first time. I kept talking as the first cycle began. However, assigning roles took 4 hours and a lot of energy. The cards were so accurate that I was able to match people's skills to their functions, with a precision I couldn't legally explain. The problem was that such precise assignments, without any visible reason, seemed like total favoritism to her. Jean went to the infirmary. She looked at her hands, then turned to me and asked, "How did you know I had medical training?" I simply replied, "You were the first person to check someone's injuries without asking." This was true, but not the whole truth. She agreed, and her card was updated. Coordinator Trust +6. I sent Sona to the technical sector. She didn't even ask how I knew she was right for there. She picked up her heavy tool bag and, without a word, went straight to the control panel. Her social score was low. For some reason, she communicated through her actions, not words. Then I went to a partner in security, and that's where the real trouble began. I made Cheyenne her collide because she had a cool head and could perform a conflict role, which was a perfect counter to Arjun. Arjun looked at them both for 3 seconds and then angrily said, "I don't need a partner." I told her that the security rotation covers 6 zones and 2 people are more efficient than 1. Everyone was watching, and Arjun was the main focus for her. Not the work, but the fact that I had challenged her in front of everyone. Her cards spiked. Conflict index high and emotional triggers active. She took Cheyenne and left without looking back. System notification efficiency increased by 22, tension moderate, and the risk of internal coup by Arjun in 72 hours was 64. I kept that 6 store in mind and moved on. I assigned Ming Hao to ration distribution. She was terrified. She thought it was punishment for her theft. So I let her sweat for 3 seconds. Then I told him that everyone knows you, so no one will dare call you dishonest. His card was updated. Ego commitment was active, and motivation was high. For the next several weeks, he ran the cleanest distribution system. By nightfall, we had a structure. It wasn't functional, but theoretically, it looked good on paper, only to be hit by reality. The next morning, the family coefficient was 11, participation 34, and coordinator trust 31. The system report was clear. Function compliance was partial, and 3 employees were missing from their sectors. The system showed a hidden resource stash in Sector B, owned by an unknown person. Someone had planned this before the distribution system was even created, but I didn't tell anyone. I went to Sector B myself and found the stash wrapped in a spare shirt behind a vent panel. It wasn't a random act like Minghui's, but it seemed like a well-thought-out plan. I left it there and set off a sensor flag indicating cash had been found, but it hasn't been finalized yet. The system approved my decision for the first time. It felt as if the interface and I were working together. The 3 missing employees came to lunch but didn't report for duty, 2 of whom were in Edge's circle. The third was a girl named Rena, whose card showed loyalty 44, stress high, and pure attachment high. She wasn't rebelling. She simply followed those who made her feel safe, and they weren't following the schedule. The agent hadn't asked her to leave, but he didn't even need to. He simply made his circle feel they didn't need to obey this unelected leader. A system notification came that a cohesion crisis was developing. 8 members of Edge's group were taking a different path. Before they could be confirmed, I needed a hard reset. Then, at 1900 hours, the water recycler returned an error code. If it had failed, the recycler would have shut down. The repair required tools we didn't have. Without the recycler, we wouldn't have any drinking water beyond our emergency reserve, and with today's consumption, that emergency reserve would only last for 48 hours. Sona detected the breakdown in 11 minutes and came straight to me, not to Arjun or the rest of the group. Without a word, she showed me all the readings on her handheld device. The repair required 2 people, one to maintain pressure in the main line and the other to reset the valve. She asked me if I could hold the pressure, and I immediately took over. She reset the valve in 4 minutes, and the recycler was back to normal. By the time we exited the technical corridor, the system had locked in on this collaborative repair. The result was that a major failure was averted, and the family's efficiency increased, all by fixing just 1 pipe. Then came a second notification, stating that 0 members of the group were aware of the issue, the potential impact of which was still unrealized. The recommendation was to bring this result to the public's attention. However, I hadn't even considered it. Sona hadn't either. She had already returned to the panel to diagnose the next failure. During dinner, I went to the main hall and told everyone what had happened and how Sona had fixed everything. I gave them the raw numbers. Only 48 hours of water left, and the diagnosis and repair took 11 minutes. The whole room stared at Sona as she stared at the floor as if she were about to disappear. The family's efficiency increased by 3, and Sona's trust index increased by 14. The coefficient shot up in a single day. The hidden cash appeared in Sector D that night. This meant the owner had moved it after I tagged it. A system alert came out stating that the resource cache had been moved, and the owner was still slowly accumulating items. His card indicated he was quite cunning. His loyalty was 52, but his survival instinct was paramount. He was manipulative. He wasn't stealing for personal gain, but for his own security. He wanted a private reserve because he didn't trust the system to provide for him in difficult times. His thinking was rational, but what the group needed to learn at this moment was completely contrary to his. I could have spoken to Zari privately, but the system only projected a 71% compliance rate. Confronting him in front of everyone had an 88% success rate, but this could have led to him becoming the leader of the anti-coordinator sentiment. Or I could have used him. This third option wasn't even on the system's menu. That night, I went to Julie and, without further ado, sat down directly next to her. I quietly said, "I know there are 6 units in Sector D because the system tells me." He was completely surprised. But I continued, saying, "I'm not going to take them. I want you to put them back in front of everyone tomorrow when the rations are distributed." He looked at me and asked, "Why would I do that?" I replied, "Right now, you're just the guy who took the extras. But if you return them yourself, you'll be the one who understands what the group needs." He remained silent for a long time, then muttered, "You're manipulating me." I said, "I'm just giving you a better option. Now you have to decide for yourself." While he sat there thinking, his card updated 3 times. His loyalty reached 58, and the next morning he returned every single unit. He didn't give a speech. He simply placed them on the table and left. The group noticed this, and the family coefficient increased by 5. By the 7th day, we reached 23, well short of the goal of 40. But the momentum had shifted. A coefficient of 40 was crucial to unlocking the food modules, At 23, we were still at starvation minimum, which was enough to function, but our hunger wasn't satiated. During morning distribution on the 8th day, the system displayed a new notification indicating an impending crisis event. A critical failure was imminent in the hydroponic power relay, with 4 hours remaining. If not repaired, the hydroponic units would be permanently out of service. The fix required the simultaneous work of 3 different sectors. At least 6 people were needed from different sectors, but our cooperation rate was only 14. I had only 4 hours left to convince the group of agents. The system suggested an emotional trigger for the agents, but my plan was different. A high-pressure situation where no one can do anything alone. Teamwork is required, even without trust. I saw the 4-hour countdown on my HUD and decided to wait. At exactly 11:40, the hydroponic relay stopped working. According to the system's predictions, it affected 3 sectors simultaneously. 3 problems, 3 locations, and 6 people needed to fix them in parallel. I posted all the failure data on a panel in the main hallway for everyone to see. I didn't make any announcements. I just showed the cold numbers, saying that if the repair wasn't done immediately, it would be over. I went to the tech sector and started working with Sona, leaving the rest to her. Jin's group resisted for 18 minutes while the others gathered around the panel. Then, a girl named Ray, whose card said practical, walked toward the relay without saying a word. Jin watched her, and the authority tension and emotional triggers on her card spiked. A battle raged within her between group loyalty and problem-solving instinct. At the 22-minute mark, Jin went after her, but not with her entire group. Only Cheon accompanied her, as they had spent a lot of time together on security shifts. They headed straight for the hydroponics bay, where the relay housing needed 2 people from the opposite side. This repair required cooperation, not friendship, just physics. And that countdown was Az. She coordinated the entire task so well, as if she'd been doing it for years. A system update came back, saying the intersector repair was complete, with 7 people working for 2 hours and 41 minutes. The result was that the hydroponic units were fixed, and the family coefficient increased to 11. Just 1 repair resulted in a gallon jump and a new unlock, enabling hydroponic unit 2 to activate. Food production began, and the prediction was that our 18 needs would be met by day 21. The man-have panel updated, and everyone watched together. No one celebrated, because that atmosphere hadn't been created yet. But that hungry silence had now turned into a hopeful silence, because the math was in their favor. Kinship efficient was 34. We were just 6 points away from the target, our best score yet. At 6 a.m., the system sent a daily report with a new alert: threshold proximity. Reaching 40 was estimated to take 4 to 7 days, and the accelerator was Italian cooperation. The obstacle was our internal trust deficit and my transparency score, which was at 44. These cards were giving me advantages for which I had no explanation. Every correct action and predicted conflict was forming a pattern that the group began to notice. She asked me if I knew Sona would fix the water recycler. I replied that I sent Sona to the tech sector because she's been carrying tools since day 1. Did you know young Jin had medical training? Did you know Minji would ask for extra rations? I didn't respond immediately. Her card flashed, indicating she was very suspicious and angry. He said, "You're reading us." I said, "I just observe people carefully, but I can't make predictions with that much precision." He crossed his arms and asked, "What is the system showing you that we're not seeing?" The system ran a projection that revealing everything could increase my coordinator score by 18. But there was a 41% risk that everyone would use that information to challenge my authority. Avoiding the conversation would have been even worse. My score would have dropped to 9, and a suspicion would have remained a constant threat. I explained that the individual cards are skills, stress levels, and conflict probability, which I've been observing from the beginning. So you're basing our decisions on data we didn't even know existed. I said yes. 5 emotional states changed on his card, and then he asked, "Show me my card." I read it all to him. Power drive, conflict index, betrayal, risk, emotional triggers, everything. She listened without interrupting and, upon finishing, sank into a deep silence. She murmured softly that the hidden factor, rigidity, which conceals her fear of losing control of her own life, wasn't her fault, but rather confirming the truth she'd never told me. Then she looked at me. She said, "If you show everyone their cards, half the group will break up." I said, "I know that, but if you hide them and they find out later, everything will be ruined." I said, "I know that too." She thought for a while and said, "Show them to those who can handle it, and let them tell the rest." This wasn't a system suggestion. It wasn't full disclosure, nor was it a deception. It was a third way, offered by her, who understood the group better than any algorithm. By the time she left the room, her loyalty had dropped from 61 to 33. But on day 13, a jealousy crisis struck. Arjun was handling 3 critical cases: an infection, a fracture, and a woman who had stopped eating. I spent 4 hours in Inferi that day. I stayed there for 3 more the next day, and then 4 more. This wasn't by choice, but by necessity. Yunanjin's growth trigger was activating, and she needed support. On day 15, the system displayed a crisis. People felt I was creating a preferred inner circle. The group felt only certain individuals had access to it, leading to increased passive aggression and the risk of sabotage. Yuri had rebuilt her social image after the stash incident and was slowly provoking people. What she was seeing wasn't wrong, but she was presenting it to everyone in her own way. On day 16, Edge came to me and warned that Yuri was running a slow campaign against me. I said that Yuri wasn't wrong on the facts, only on the motives, but the motives weren't visible. Therefore, I had to correct her behavior. I spent 1 day designing the rotation system and 2 days implementing it. Now each sector leader held open consultations for the entire group and reported to everyone, not just me. I divided my work time among each sector on a public schedule. Each one got 44 minutes. There was no hiding anything. It was quite mechanical. But the system responded quickly, and the inner circle issue slowly began to fade. Then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. During the first open consultation, a girl named Hannah asked Yejin how to treat a kitchen appliance burn. Yejin explained everything without hesitation, with a level of detail she hadn't shown in the first week. At the end, Hannah said, "You're really good at this." Yejin felt like she'd heard what she'd been waiting for years. Her growth boost card was updated. The first successful public intervention, complete confidence, activated leadership, potential emerging card, had said everything right. But seeing it in person was quite different from reading the card. On day 19, the family's efficient 38. The food modules were just 2 blocks away from the target. Then the system decided to conduct its first test run. Test event, limited goods enhanced rations available. 2 hours for only 10 out of 50. Portions, honesty, group response, and willingness to share. Reward for honesty, 8 coefficient in kitchen 2. A 6-point deduction for arguments on unlocks, and a hydroponics freeze. I put all the details on the panel. I did the same as during the hydroponics failure, just numbers, schedules, and parameters. No suggestions. The system wanted to observe the group, not my instructions. The room filled up even faster than the first day. A jinn looked at the panel and turned to me, asking, "Won't you tell us how to handle this?" I said, "The system wants to see what the group does." She said, "The 10 portions for 50 people are just to create arguments." I said, "Yes, of course." She turned to the group. I watched her calculate the numbers. The old age in would select 10 people and reward them to her circle. Her card clearly displayed that greed, self-interest vector active. Then she pressed it. For reputation, she had calculated how a fair distribution would affect her status and what the cost of being selfish would be. The mathematical result. It turned out to be exactly the right answer. She told the group that the sick people would be the first ones. Age-in would decide the list, and whoever argued would meet me. Everyone agreed within 4 seconds. Age-in checked the in-logs and returned 10 names, 3 sick, 4 with poor nutrition, and 3 children with pre-existing deficiencies. No one argued. The system updated. Honest distribution reward at kitchen 2. Unlocked and total to efficient. 46. The food modules opened with a sound I hadn't heard before. It wasn't an alarm, but more like a deep mechanical breath. Lines appeared one by one on my panel. Food modules unlocked. Hydroponic online kitchen in operational rationing mode. Standard provision, not starvation. This time, no one shouted or cheered, but a sense of calm spread throughout the room, as if a great pressure had been released. 50 people had been surviving on hope alone for the past 19 days. The one who had given up food was the first to cry. She stood silently near the food module, expressionless, but tears were flowing. The system locked it as a non-quantifiable event, something I had never seen before. That night, I checked the family report. Coefficient 46, participation 78, coordinator trust 61, we had done it. We had transformed from a crowded shelter into a functional shelter in just 19 days. We had a working infirmary, an active tech department, and a kitchen that actually cooked. And beneath it all was the card system that told me things about these people that they themselves didn't know. A transparency index of 44 meant half the group still didn't fully trust me. Arjun knew the truth, and that single fact had raised his loyalty from 61 to 61. A system notification arrived that the coordinator was below the transparency threshold. Recommended action structure disclosure. As cohesion increased, the risk of them catching my anomalies increased. I had 72 hours left. I looked at the 50 cards floating in my digital overlay. They had started as strangers and were now becoming something more. Not exactly friends, not exactly family, just something in between. What the system had labeled family as efficient, just to give it a number. I had 3 days to tell them everything I'd been seeing since day 1. Meanwhile, the 4th unlocked level waited behind a door I'd twice refused to open. Level 4, training room, residential sectors, and data archive. This required 60 efficients. We were at 46. 14 points were needed to view the archives. I closed the terminal and went to find Arjun. He'd had a tough day, not because of the system or the points, and he'd handled it well. I held a briefing on day 21, without any warning. At 8 o'clock, I wrote a line on the panel saying everyone had a meeting. At 2 o'clock in the main hall, the hallway was bustling with activity. News spreads quickly in such a closed space. By 2 o'clock, all 50 were there, and Arjun was watching from the back to see how the crowd reacted. I stood in front and told them everything. Interface cards, loyalty stats. I explained that I'd been using them for the first hour. I didn't hide anything. I said that I'd based their life decisions on data they didn't even know existed. There was silence in the room while I spoke, and it remained so for a minute after I finished. You knew I'd take the extra portion, because the card had resource anxiety. But you let me take it anyway, I replied. I wanted the group to see the results for themselves. But she called it rude. Eerie, her nervous laughter gone, raised her hand like in a classroom. She asked, "Can we see our cards?" I said, "Whoever wants to can." Then came a barrage of questions. It wasn't chaos, but it was a complicated atmosphere. They formed into pairs, and I listed their stats. Some remained silent, while others argued with the results. When Sol challenged his conflict index, I listed his 14 fights over 19 days. She fell silent. Cherie recited her entire card, loyalty 52, survival instinct dominant. Then she stared at me for a long time. She asked if I knew her stash beforehand. I said yes, of course. Because everyone's well-being was more important than immediately confiscating it. She asked, and I nodded. She calmed down. Then she admitted she would have made the same decision, which was a big deal for her. Yuri's loyalty rose to 64. But Bitna left early. Her autonomy stat was too high. Bitna hated this surveillance. She returned after 3 hours but didn't say where she was. Her compliance score dropped for 2 days and then stabilized. She interpreted it her way, just like the card had said. After the meeting, 2 new people came to Ajin and said they didn't like being watched without consent. Ajin overheard and asked if they wanted a coordinator who would make decisions without any data. Ajin had no answer. Ajin wasn't being kind. She was just making precise statements that often sounded the same. That night, my transparency index jumped from 44 to 79, and group trust rose to 74. The system was perfect. The timing of telling the truth was perfect. I was frozen in fear. But the crowd's reaction proved more effective than my planning. On day 20, the doors to the training room finally opened. The family reached efficient 60 when 6 girls from different sectors cleaned up their sleeping areas on their own. Level 4, unlocked, giving access to the training room, residential sectors, and data archives. The training room was the first place that seemed built for more than just survival. It had high ceilings, rubber floors, and weights and climbing gear on the walls. This was meant for those who would stay there to strengthen themselves. The new residential sectors had 12 private rooms, allocated by the system based on stress and sleep. The girls with the highest stress levels got first access, and Yejin's name was there. She looked at the list for a moment, then turned to me. She said my stress is high because I handle security, and then took the key. She didn't say thank you, but the card was showing its effect. Stress dropped by 14 points, and performance increased. The data archive was still locked behind a new condition. The family had to reach an efficiency of 75. Now only 14 points remained. I noted it before opening it and moved on. I had to meet the target before wondering what was inside the archive. On day 26, the first major physical crisis emerged after the water plant. Carbon had accumulated in the ventilation of Kitchen Unit 2. It was a silent failure, detected by a headache. Sona detected it using air quality sensors she had been monitoring since day 3. She brought me a report, just like Dimitri, and I realized my mistake. Her approach was clear and precise, offering 3 solutions based on resources. Option 1. A complete cleaning, which would take 6 hours and shut down the kitchen. Option 2. A minor cleaning and filter replacement, which would have to be repeated in 10 days. Option 3. Seal the kitchen and change the flow until spare parts arrived. I said option 1, because it's better not to cook for a day than to have an emergency later. I worked with her for the first 2 hours, while Chae-young handled everything in Kitchen 1. By noon, we had removed the casing and cleaned off the carbon, and our hands were black. Sona looked at the vents with amusement, as if she enjoyed solving the problem. She asked, "At this rate, carbon will build up again in 14 days. How can we prevent this?" I told her to give Minji the parameters to add shorter cooking cycles to the schedule. Sona asked me, "Do you only give work to those whose cards fit hers?" I said yes, it works. She didn't say this as a compliment, just an observation. On day 28, a small war crisis occurred, as dangerous as the system had warned. There were 3 separate conflicts that initially seemed minor, but the truth was something else. The number 1 conflict was the shower schedule. 2 girls became so enraged over sharing a slot that they ended up messing with the hot water and messing with the sheets. The fight escalated into a commotion in the number 2 rest area. Even after being moved twice, a group of 4 girls kept everyone awake at night by chatting. The morning shift members began to retaliate, leading to a fight that escalated into the number 3 kitchen rotation. Someone was leaving a dirty station, and the blame fell on 3 innocent people, increasing tension. A system notification came out that small war crises were turning into feuds, and the coefficient could plummet. I presented this to the council. Arjun, Yunnan, Jin, Manji, Sona, and Kachin offered no explanation. I told them to fix it, and they took 44 minutes. Arjun created a strict shower schedule and penalties. She made it look like a security rotation, ensuring it was impeccably clean and leaving no excuses. Arjun sent the noisy group to another wing. She had already studied the blueprints. Sona provided a kitchen inspection plan where everyone would check their station for the next user. It wasn't about pointing fingers, but about accountability, and the system locked it into governance. Family quotient increased, council authority was activated, and dependency on me decreased. It had been my goal from day one that the group function on its own, without my interference. After 48 hours, all conflicts seemed to have ended. Day 31 arrived. A girl named Genia made a request I hadn't anticipated. She asked to become a teacher. She had previously been an elementary teacher, and there were 7 students who had dropped out. She was already taking classes in a corner, but now she needed a proper schedule in space. I looked at her card. Her motivation was high, but engagement was low. Because I hadn't assigned her the right role. I had placed her in hydroponics because she was patient. But that wasn't her true identity. I had ignored her identity. So I gave her the back of the training room. In 6 hours, she prepared a space where old boxes were turned into chairs and a board was retrieved from storage. 7 children and 3 adults came to the first session, and within 5 days, 11 adults began attending. The system updated the education sector. The coefficient increased, and Genia's purpose index also increased. The system also noted my mistake. I had chosen Genia's role incorrectly. I had been making mistakes since day 1, some minor, some significant. For 31 days, one person performed less because I had read her cards superficially. That night, I read all 50 cards again to see if I had missed anyone's identity. I found 6 such cases, and the next 3 days were spent correcting them. By day 35, the efficiency had risen to 71. There were now 2 sessions in the training room. Genia conducted physical and defense training in the afternoon. The group embraced it with such enthusiasm that I was astonished until I noticed 50 people were living underground without any access. So naturally, he would want to protect himself. The data on the card had been showing this for weeks, but I hadn't noticed it, obsessing over the coefficient. Arjun ran every session with a strict and precise approach, leaving no room for carelessness. But the card I was reading now was different. Her confrontational nature was now in its proper place. Her hidden factor had updated. Her fears were now being transformed into control, partially resolved. She had found a place where she could truly utilize her power. She had found her way, just as Arjun and Sona had found theirs. Everyone had found their way. Now, it was easy to understand when to intervene and when not. On the morning of day 37, Sona came to my door. At 5:30 a.m., she said the archive access panel was now active. I checked that the family had an efficient of 75 and had received level 4 data archive access. This wasn't a speech or ceremony, but a natural process. The trust people had shown in each other over the past 37 days had crossed the threshold. I got up and went with her to the archive, which was much smaller than I had expected. There was a terminal, and the walls were lined with digital and physical filing systems. The terminal was already on, waiting for us, just like the main system had been since day 1. Level 4, data research logs, old documents, group results, and design parameters. Everything was there. A warning came up that some records contained information about old resident groups. Sona read the panel behind me and, surprised to hear about old groups, asked how many there were. I opened the index and saw old files there, much older than I had imagined. Group 1 arrived 4 years ago and stayed for 23 days. Group 2 arrived 3 years ago and stayed for 61 days. The results were written there. Group 3 arrived 2 years and 11 months ago and only lasted 14 days. When I counted, a total of 9 groups had been there before us. Group 9 had arrived 8 months earlier and only lasted 31 days. The one from 8 months earlier had only lasted 31 days, and we were on day 37 today. Sona stood absolutely still as I closed the index without checking the results. I told her not to tell anyone until I'd read every single document. She looked at me and understood I wanted to know the truth first. Then I'd decide what to say. After a while, she said, "You did the same thing you did with the letters." I said, "Absolutely right." She didn't argue and went to the tax department. But I was alone, looking at those terminal results. Outside, 50 people's 37 days of hard work were stagnant in that bunker that had now become like home to them. I opened the first file. Group 1 had an efficient 31% result. Due to infighting, the group was dissolved and the facility reset. Group 3 had an efficient 8% result, as lack of cooperation had exhausted resources and resulted in a facility reset. Group 6's coefficient was 68%. It lasted 34 days, but they failed due to the legacy protocol, and the facility was reset. The legacy protocol was the same menu I'd seen under the Level 5 access requirements. At 5:30 a.m., I was reading reports from the 9 groups who had tried to build trust like us. 8 groups never made it to 44%. 1 reached 68% but failed the protocol. We were at 75%. A system notification flashed. Coordinator reading time, 2 hours and 14 minutes. The recommendation was to tell everyone within 48 hours. The risk was high, because people were now so close to each other that it was difficult to hide the truth. I had 48 hours. I had to tell 50 people that we weren't the first. The others had failed, and the legacy protocol was waiting for us. Outside, the kitchen was starting to work, and Ginia was setting up chairs for the morning class. Day 37, and we were at 75%. We had already moved ahead. But I didn't tell them anything until day 38. I didn't want to do it all in the dark or in front of just 2 people. I called everyone to the main hall at 2 p.m. when they knew something big was about to happen. I displayed the archive directory on the main panel. 9 groups had failed 9 times, and their fate was in front of everyone. Then I read the entry for Group 6, 68% efficient, and the legacy protocol started on the same day. But the result was incomplete and reset. The entire room fell silent, as if trying to understand this. Ari spoke first, asking what the facility reset meant. It wasn't written in the archive. I said the records ended there. I told her I didn't know what happened to the old groups because there was nothing in the records. This was my most terrifying and honest answer since day 1. Yajin stared at the panel for a long time and confirmed that we were at the top of the Saxon 5%. She asked why I was revealing it now. So I explained the system's 48-hour risk warning. I told her I wanted her to hear it from me, and she nodded without saying anything. The room dispersed. Bitna's group went to think about it privately. Meng began to worry about resources, and the system's stress index immediately began to rise. The 3 newcomers, alarmed, went to Yajin, who seemed the strongest. Then something surprising happened. Yuri stood up and asked what was at level 5. She didn't care about safety or the past. The next target was already set in her mind. I told her that level 5 requires 85% efficiency, and we were at 75%. She thought she only needed 10 more points to find out. But I knew. There was another way to look at it. Another possibility could be that the group that came closest failed the legacy protocol. Yuri looked at me and said that staying at 44% wasn't safety but stupidity. Everyone's mood began to lean towards his logic. It was hard to deny, but even harder to believe. A notification flashed. Stress was high, so the system asked to delay the response. I gave them 2 hours. No meetings, no work, just peace. An hour later, Yanjin came to me and told me that Jaewoo had stopped eating again. Jaewoo, who had barely settled into a routine, was now breaking down again. I asked when it started. Yanjin said it had started the morning before the meeting. I don't think it's because of that file. It's been brewing inside for a long time. That file has simply given a face to her fear. Her profile updated. The growth trigger was fulfilled, and her clinical instinct was activated. I started to investigate the real reason instead of superficially. I asked what she needed. So Eugene said she needed someone to support her. She said she trusted medical help, but she needed someone of her own. When I asked who she was, Eugene said it was Ari. Ari had spent the first 2 weeks just talking nonsense. But after the corridor collapse, she calmed down, and her fear had turned into understanding. She had finally stopped pretending. I found Ari sitting in a corner of the training room. I sat next to her and said directly, "Jaewoo needs you." She looked at me and said, "I'm not a therapist." I told her, "You're someone who is just as scared, and now you've gotten out. This is more helpful than any therapist." Ari fell silent. Her card showed high stress, but she was processing it mentally. She asked, "Are the other groups that failed like us?" I said, "I don't know, because the records didn't have that much detail." She went to find Jaewoo, and her card showed a new status. Growth Activator Day 39 revealed the same danger I'd been expecting since opening the file. Chasing that truth meant we were part of an experiment that always ended in disaster. A system notification came in that crisis members were questioning the system's validity. Mina was speaking, and the 32 people standing in the hallway were nodding their heads. Their cards showed their confidence had been shaken. They felt their lives were a lie. Egan was standing there, silently looking between Mina and me. I stood up and told him, "You're right. This is an experiment. The file proves it. The researchers created it to see if the group stays together under pressure. Coefficient is their measure." The room fell silent. I then admitted that I'd been using psychological data on you since day 21. I'm still doing that. I can see that the stress of 32 people is high, and I know how to convince them. Mina angrily asked if I understood the problem. I said, "I understand your feelings. But the truth is, the previous 8 groups didn't even reach 40%, while we're at 7%. The system is the same for everyone. The only difference is what this group did to it." He retorted, "You made us do this." I didn't deny it. I influenced it. Yes. But Egon himself ran down the corridor to save Ari. Eugene himself decided to stay in the infirmary with the difficult patients. I didn't force him. I just created the conditions where these choices were possible. There's a difference. Yuri asked an important question from behind. What are our options? Can we leave? No one answered, because there was no way out. The doors were sealed, and level 5 was locked. The file showed that 9 groups tried to leave. But the closest approach came was incomplete. Maina said she needed full access to all the files, and I immediately agreed. I said, "Read everything and bring everything you find to the group. It's better that you find what I missed, rather than think I'm hiding something." The system was updated. The crisis was easing. The Coordinator Transparency Index increased by 8%. The coefficient increased by 2%, and the situation was stable. This was better than the 11% drop that would have resulted from lying. Maina spent 4 days in the archives. On day 43, she brought 31 pages of notes and presented them to everyone in the hallway. The result was disastrous. Groups 1 through 5 all failed below 40%. The pattern was always the same. Someone would dominate, seize resources, the system would penalize, and the group would disintegrate. Group 6 was different. With a female coordinator, they had achieved 68% in 4 days. The archives only mentioned Group 6. The researchers were watching them closely because their bond was strong. The failure of the legacy protocol wasn't their fault. It was a technical glitch. The system reset the facility because the equipment was malfunctioning. The group wasn't at fault. Mina looked at me. Her loyalty index had risen, and she said the name of Group 6's coordinator was written as Dr. K. Basil. The name made everyone freeze, as if they sensed the presence of a ghost. Someone had been here before, and had actually tried to break through. Mina explained that she had left notes locked behind an 85% restriction in a level 5 file. Our coefficient was 73%, and we were just 10 points away from breaking that lock. At our pace, we could have reached 44% 10 days or less. But on day 44, a resource crisis struck. Hydroponic Unit 1 had a critical failure, and everything went haywire. The impact was that food production would drop by 40% for 14 days. We had 21 days of stock, and a 14-day shortage was very dangerous for us. Sona had already left for hydroponics before I alerted her. She returned and said the base layer was damaged and needed a complete replacement. I asked how clean the material was. She said she didn't know, but I needed a team. I asked her to consult Rai and Chayan, and immediately removed Chayan from the security rotation. Sona warned me that Egan wouldn't like it. I said, yes, I know. Egan didn't like it, and when I broke the news, he clearly showed his anger. But he accepted the new rotation because the math was clear, and Egan always bows to logic. 4 hours later, the inventory was checked. We had plenty of clean soil and a 20% reserve. The system updated to confirm the hydroponic crisis was under control. The coefficient had increased by 3% to 76%. On day 46, Ari came to me with something the system cards hadn't yet caught. She'd been spending time with Jivo every day, and she'd finally broken her silence. Ari quietly told me what had happened to Jivo before she came to the facility. I waited. Then she explained that Jivo was with a large group during the outbreak. They were going to the shelter. But the group voted on who to save, and they didn't choose Jivo. She somehow survived, but she saw how they had thrown her away like garbage. I checked Ari's card. Her growth trigger had now shifted from active to integrated. It seemed as if she had absorbed that trauma and made it a solid part of her strength. I said she must have told you this in confidence. Ari nodded and said, I'm telling you because you should know this, not to fix it, but to understand it. Her trust function had now shifted from managed to genuine. I thought about the difference for a while and thanked her. She nodded and left. I didn't record those things in the system log. Although the system had a column for psychological risk factors, I left it blank. A system notification said the data entry was incomplete and asked me to record everything, but I turned it off. Some things aren't meant for algorithms. On day 49, the efficiency was 79, just 6 points away from level 5. Just 6 points away from Dr. Basil's notes, and just 6 points away from the original version of the legacy protocol. The group had changed. Some things were showing efficiency, and others weren't. Indicators were showing it. 91% participation and 74% trust levels and roles were being fully followed. Sector cooperation had also increased. What wasn't visible was the ability for 50 people to sit together and have dinner, without the heavy silence that used to prevail, the way Egan led afternoon training. And when someone fell, he'd actually laugh, seeing that they were okay. Sona had started leaving little notes on the tech panels for the next shift. No orders, just observations, like the recycler was a little hot. The system couldn't measure all that. It could only measure the results from these things. That night, the system sent me a new notification, one I'd never seen before. A critical test event was scheduled to occur in 18 hours. 3 crucial systems were going to fail simultaneously. The solution was that every sector would have to work together. If they failed, everything would reset. If they failed, the coefficient would revert to failure. Everything earned from days 46 to 79 would be wiped out. Success would result in a 10% bonus, and level 5 would be unlocked immediately. The same done points and Dr. Basil's notes. I stared at that notification for 18 hours. One group had made it this far, but the team had failed. Now it was time to see if the 10th time would be any different. Not because the system had gotten easier, but because the group had gotten better. I prepared a briefing. 3 failures and 50 people watching. What does innocence really mean? The briefing lasted only 11 minutes. At 6 o'clock, I flashed the parameters on the main display and explained everything without beating around the bush. 3 failures, 4 hours of time, and 40 resets per failure. Then I explained the benefit, 10 points, level 5, and Dr. Basil's notes. Everyone in the room understood it quickly. The data from the Lewis days had changed him. He no longer feared bad news, but he didn't listen, as he had in the first week. Yijin asked, which 3 sectors? I said we won't know until the failures start. The system doesn't give any warning, so we have to be prepared for anything. He said, I understand. He turned and, before I could say anything, began calling out names and setting up rotations to free up staff. The tech team was on standby in 3 locations. The information was ready, and the kitchen was sealed. It took 6 minutes in total. Her card hadn't changed. Same power, same style, but she was putting all her energy into the right place. I watched her work and remembered day 1 when she'd look at me as if I didn't exist. The failures began at 13:40. 3 alerts came simultaneously. The panel turned red, and 50 people had already reached their positions before the siren sounded. A pressure failure occurred in the Sector 1 water recycler line. Sona was already there. She had spotted the error by looking at the court before reaching the unit. She called for an assistant. She chose Rai, her old partner, and began her work. The Sector 2 ventilation system had failed in the entire corridor of the residential wing. The carbon buildup protocol she'd performed on day 26 was a warning. The system was preparing us for this. Fixing it required manual resets at 4 points. 4 people, 4 locations, and a simultaneous countdown. While Arjun took command, and based on experience rather than rank, he assembled a team in 90 seconds. Sector 3's power supply. This was going to be the biggest test. It was easy to fix. Just a relay bypass, which Sona had written down in her notes 3 weeks ago. The real challenge was the backup. Patient monitoring had gone down. While Jaebu was handling both repairs and the wards, Jaewoo was in the infirmary, not letting anything go wrong. She wasn't like a patient there. She had spent a week helping Jin organize supplies. When the lights went out, she didn't panic, but stayed put. I held the backup lamp while Yoon-jin manually monitored and recorded the readings. I monitored all 3 sectors from my overlay, ready to redirect resources. 2 hours later, Sector 2 was ahead of schedule and nearing the deadline. At the 2-hour mark, Sector 1 was running exactly as planned. Sona had isolated the main line and fixed the pressure failure like a pro. But at 2 hours, Sector 3 was lagging behind. The relay bypass required a component that was now behind the emergency secondary lock. Loon-jin had the part, but she couldn't reach the installation point. I had already spotted the error. The fix required a manual override code, which was only available in the main terminal's archives. I radioed. The code for the Lund's secondary lock backroom panel is 772 Bravo 9. Try it. The lock opened. The bypass was installed, and the Inferi's power returned. Sector 3 was clear. A short while later, at 3:08, Sector 2 was also completed. Gaetan's team performed the final reset, and the ventilation corridors began operating one by one. Sector 1 ended at 3200. Sona's voice was calm, as if she were performing a routine task. The system was updated. The critical test was over. The total time was 3 hours and 22 minutes. 28 minutes remained. The efficiency increased to 89, and level 5 access was unlocked. But no one shouted. They were all very tired. 50 people had worked to the limit for 3 hours. The feeling of victory would come later. Right now, I just had to sit down, so I went to the infirmary. Jin was now doing final checks on the monitoring equipment. He was syncing the manual locks back to the system records. Jin stood beside him with a clipboard and, without looking, asked, "What's the override code?" I replied, 772. Bravo 9. It was in the archive documentation. He paused for a second while typing and asked, "How long have you had it?" I said, "Since day 37, when the archive was opened." "Why didn't you give it to me earlier?" He asked, "Because that lock only activates during an emergency power failure." I looked him in the eye and said, "I didn't know." "We'll need it." "Until we do." She looked up, and her face took on that old look as if she were making a diagnosis. "Okay," she said, "but you could have given me this earlier as a plan B." "Yes," I admitted. She looked at me for a moment, then went back to writing notes and adding them to the infirmary files. "I already did," I said. Her trust in the coordinator. It was now 74. Level 5 was hidden just below the archive room. I'd passed by that wall 14 times, but never realized there were stairs. It was a flat panel until we gained access and an outline appeared. Sona found it first, but I went down alone. It wasn't protocol. It was just instinct. 9 groups had been here before us, and people said one group had reached it. The font was different from the systems. It was handwritten and scanned. If you're reading this, it means your group has reached level 5. It means you accomplished what the previous 8 groups couldn't. I don't know what it was. Every group's path is different. But you got here. My name is Dr. Katrina Basil, and I was the coordinator of Group 6. We moved from day 94 to day 68 and began the legacy protocol on day 97. But early on, the level 3 equipment malfunctioned, and the facility reset before completion. I'm writing this from outside the facility. I survived the reset because coordinators are evacuated instead of rebooting. I didn't know that before. I left these notes so you don't repeat the same mistake we did. I don't know if the others survived, but their fates should be in the archive records. I can tell you the truth about the legacy protocol, which the system menu doesn't fully explain. The atmospheric treatment unit in this room is actually a dispersal system. The compound contained within it was designed as a broad-spectrum behavioral stabilizer. It wasn't a cure for the pathogen, but a means of preventing the subsequent social collapse. Researchers believed that the pathogen would be contained, but people's bad behavior wouldn't be. This compound suppresses the neurological stress response that triggers violence and riots. It doesn't eliminate fear, but it prevents fear from turning into attacks on others. It works before an outbreak. We tested it for 18 months, and it works. The legacy protocol spreads it worldwide through an atmospheric processing network. Such Gabon and facilities are waiting for a coordinator with a high enough family efficiencies. 2. Is your group willing to spread it worldwide without people's consent? 3. Does the outside world now have minors? I don't know the answer to the third question. I don't know what's left outside. The sensors haven't been updated since the outbreak. But I do know that 50 people have learned to trust each other in a closed room. This is no small thing. This is the biggest thing. When the time comes, the system will display the legacy protocol menu. Signed by Katerina Basil. I sat for a long time after finishing the letter. The interface was completely silent. No notifications or efficiency calculations. The system had nothing to say. It waited like a terminal, with the patience of someone who has been waiting for a very long time. I thought about those 9 groups. 8 never arrived. 1 arrived, but the equipment failed. I thought about the Brazilian who wrote this note after the reset. He didn't even know if his people were alive. He left instructions anyway. I thought about those 3 questions. I couldn't answer the first 2 alone. The third question couldn't be answered without turning on the sensors to see what was left. I went back upstairs. At 7 o'clock, the entire group gathered in the main hall. I read Basil's entire letter to them, without any summary or changes. Just his words, his voice, and the way he wrote it. When I finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. This was information that changed the entire perspective of the questions. So I first said, external sensors. I'm activating them now. The main panel began updating. It took 40 seconds for the data to load. 49 days of isolation ended, and a number appeared on the screen. Regional population estimate 4,000. Behavioral patterns fragmented high conflict resources, disputed 34,000 people were alive only in this region, and this high conflict behavior was precisely what Basil's compound was designed to address. Ari stared at the number for a long time. So they're doing the same thing we were doing on day 1. I said yes, they just don't have a system to help them. I replied, no, they haven't. Those 3 questions hung heavy in the room, like a heavy object. They were so solid and heavy that it took more than one person to move them. I looked at the 50 faces who had arrived as strangers on day 1. Now they were looking at me. But they had all changed. I said, this isn't my decision. It never was. The system status, legacy protocol, group authorization, pending coordinator input, had been received. Now the group's consensus was awaited. The clock was ticking. The group needed a night's rest, so I gave them time. I deliberately turned off the clock on the main panel to relieve the pressure. The 72-hour deadline was true, but making a hasty decision could have been dangerous. The Basel letter had been waiting for years. Waiting another 8 hours wouldn't have changed anything. Everyone dispersed into the groups they had formed over the previous 49 days. These weren't the hostile groups of the first week. There were only people with like-minded views. Edge's group remained in the training room, while those from the Gain group met in the infirmary. Mina, as usual, went back to the archives. I remained on the level 5 terminal and began reading Basil's research files in detail. Data from 18 months of trials in the poorest sectors before the outbreak, tracking compound dispersal behavior, and complete side effect monitoring reports. The data was vast. The kind of work only people who believe in their own work can do. The compound worked. She was silent for a while, knowing that Basil must have thought this when he wrote the letter. I asked why he hadn't left us an answer. This wasn't research. It was a question of values. Mina looked at her notes, where she had written that people outside were fragmented and fighting for resources. That pattern was killing people every day, and this compound would reduce that death rate. The counter-argument was that we had no right to replace 34,000 people without asking. But the second argument was overwhelming. We don't even have the right to withhold something that could save someone's life. I said that's the real dilemma. Neither side has a complete victory in this. He asked what I decided, but I said I'm not the one to make that decision. He looked at me and called it a stance rather than an answer. And I agreed he was right. The meeting was at 9 o'clock. All 50 of us were gathered in the main hallway. I was on the panel, with the legacy protocol menu and the Basel letter displayed side by side. I began, we have 3 questions, and we'll answer them together. Question 1. Does the compound work as described? Mina explained the trial data, results, side effects, and methodology in a matter of minutes. She was absolutely precise. She presented both the shortcomings and the successes with equal clarity. Everyone in the room was almost unanimous. The 18-month data was solid and accurate. The system was updated. Group evaluation. Question 1. Consensus. Success. Confirmation. Confidence was high. Then came the question. Global dispersal without people's consent. Edge said people were dying so rapidly outside that consent was meaningless. He believed that withholding treatment solely because of principles was inviting death. Those who had seen the harm of acting without consent sided with Mina's thinking. Yuri, who had been silent for a while, said, "We're fighting over authority, but the matter is much simpler than that. If we were outside, we too would want someone to release this compound." Silence fell over the room. Then Ari said yes. It wasn't a vote, but the atmosphere changed. Eugene spoke softly from the infernal doorway. Consent is meant to protect people from harm. The compound doesn't cause harm, it mitigates it. This isn't a moral problem as such. The conclusion we reached wasn't completely clear or unanimous. It was the result of 39 days of difficult decisions, 37 ayes, 9 against, and 4 abstained. We didn't ignore the protest. Mina's statement was also recorded. 9 questions from 37. Does the outside world matter right now? 34,000 people fighting for crumbs? Sensors proved it did matter. A system notification came. The legacy protocol was authorized. Now the coordinator's input was needed. 11 facilities were on standby. There was a 72-hour window. I went to level 5 alone. The decision was the groups. But I had to press the button and start the clock. The room was exactly the same as yesterday. I sat down at the terminal. The menu was open. Start the 72-hour activation window. This cannot be changed. There are currently 0 confirmed cases out of 12. I was going to be the first person to start it. I thought about Basil and the 8 groups that didn't make it this far. I thought about the 37 people who decided to trust 40,000 strangers. The consent issue hadn't been resolved. It was simply a price being weighed against another. I confirmed that the Facility 1 coordinator confirmation had been recorded. The activation window was now open. 7 more confirmations were needed. 72 hours remained. I went back upstairs. The weight of that burden was daunting. I ran the counter on the main panel so everyone could see the live impact of their decisions. 3 confirmations in 6 hours, 6 in 14 hours, and 9 in 22 hours. The threshold had been crossed. The panel immediately updated. The final threshold had been crossed. 9 out of 12 confirmed. This wouldn't stop now. Everyone in the room watched the numbers change, but no one was happy. The weight of that irreversible decision hung in the air. There was no fear, but a heavy feeling. Mina stood behind. Her opposition had been recorded. She had voted no. And now she was watching the results of that lost game with a calm face. I went to her. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We don't know anything about the 9 facilities that have confirmed." I said, "Yes, it's possible they're not exactly like us." She replied, "Of course, their approach to 85 and their values are quite different from ours." I agreed. That's the part that no one can solve. It's not our decision. I've submitted myself to the process. I explained that Basil had designed it that way. Having 12 different groups reach the same threshold wasn't a technical redundancy, but an ethical one. The decision of just one group wasn't enough. The 12 groups independently choosing the same thing was the true mechanism of consent. Mina looked at me and asked, "Did you just think of this, or was it already prepared?" I said just now, but I think it's correct. At 41 hours, the 11th and 12th confirmations also arrived. All the baller facilities had confirmed. Dispersal was to begin in 6 hours. The group spent that time without any fuss, simply enjoying the daily routine of survival. Xenia led the morning session. Eugene was on his rounds, and Sona checked the ventilation again. Even though everything was fine, she did it anyway. Edge pushed everyone harder than ever in afternoon training. It was his way of coping with things beyond his control. Ari and Java sat in a corner of the gym and talked for a long time, which I couldn't hear, nor did I need to. I stayed at the main terminal, just watching the clock. With 30 minutes left, the final status update came. The dispersal network was activated, and all 12 facilities were online. The estimate was that 60 to 80% of the world's remaining population would be covered in 18 months, and the region would have 90% coverage in just 6 weeks. Just 6 weeks to reach those 3,400 people, to stop the violence and daily fighting that had begun due to a lack of resources. Right at the moment of activation, a very faint hum was heard from the Level 5 equipment. It was a faint sound, like the sound that comes from a building when something large is working perfectly. There was no smell or physical sensation. Just the hum and the active dispersal displayed on the panel. And those 50 people who had learned to trust each other in 39 days were there. At 43 hours, the germ-sealed doors opened. It was a system event I hadn't expected. The quotient was 89, and the objective had been accomplished. The exit protocol was triggered, and the security seals began to open. The doors on both sides of the main hall unlocked simultaneously. The sound of those locks echoed throughout the building, as if something long ago locked was finally being freed. At first, no one moved. Then Sona went to the nearest door and pushed it open. A concrete staircase led up, illuminated by emergency lights, leading us away from the old industrial environment. She looked back. Then she looked at me and said, "Come on." This was her biggest statement in the last 29 days. I saw how those 50 people who had come as strangers were now leaving as a family, just as the system dictated, and there was no better word. Arjun climbed the stairs first, because he was supposed to be in front. Eugene led the way with his hand on Jayevo's shoulder, while Mena walked very slowly, clutching the necklace to her chest. Ari went upstairs laughing. It was a genuine laugh. Not the nervous laugh of a first day, but the laugh of a struggle. I was last. That staircase had 43 steps. I counted them, and at the top was a door. The heavy door, sealed just like Level 5, swung open with my authorization. I placed my hand on the panel. The world outside was a little broken, but it was the same, waiting for our network to bring help to them. I authorized the last door, and it swung open. Cold air hit my face first. It was the true cold outside, with the scent of open space. Without any artificial ventilation, everyone breathed deeply together. Their breaths echoed in perfect unison. Edge had already left. The group was moving on, but I lingered on that threshold for a moment. System status, objective completed, coordinator status, discharged. Family coefficient, 89%. Duration, 49 days. Protocol complete. It was complete, not incomplete or reset. I stepped through the door. As I crossed the threshold, the system interface faded. All the overlays and metrics were gone, returning to the normal world. There were no loyalty scores, no hidden secrets, no efficiency calculations. Just 50 people standing in the cold, staring at the same sky as always, waiting for the next turn. For the first time, I didn't know what was coming next because the system had nothing to tell me. That was fine. We'd figure this out just like we figured everything else out.